Hey guys, so 2/22, 2022 is going to be happening in the next few days. So I want to go over 3 playlists I made for that day. Basically, I want to use those playlists to help raise the frequency of the collective consciousness on the 22nd. I know a lot of other channels are going to be using that day to do like a group meditation to try to contribute to the Maharishi effect. But I figured we could do something similar, but instead of doing it through meditation, we could raise our consciousness through music on the 22nd. So I'll put those 3 playlists in the description below, but I'll get into that more later. So I'm just going to start out by saying retrocausality is real, time isn't linear, and something happened in the future that had such a profound effect on consciousness and life as we know it that it's literally rippling back into its own past, which is our present day, and it's influencing us today. That's what retrocausality is. It's when the future changes the past. I know this sounds crazy, but just bear with me. And the only reason I keep saying this over and over again in my videos is because we're starting to see the ripples from the future. Like you can see it. There's another dimension, really multiple dimensions, that are starting to spill into this reality. But I think it's always been here. It's just, it has to wait until a person's consciousness is ready to see it. It's been waiting for when we were ready to become aware of its presence. Just like the transcendental object at the end of time has always been here, but it's only now that our acceleration towards it is increasing to the point to where more of us are starting to realize something's going on. And I think it's actually been influencing not just our individual lives, but literally the entire history of humankind. And to this day, it's still pulling us towards it like a magnet. It's inescapable because it already happened. What we call the future has already happened. You can call it an it or an event, but I don't really like the term event because that implies that it's like a one-time thing, and that once it happens, it's over and we can just go back to living our lives like normal. But there is no going back once you reach a certain point in your acceleration process towards it. Your consciousness is forever changed. And no, it's not a one-time event. The ripples from the future come and go in waves. And as we accelerate towards this indescribable future event or process, it's the wave intensity and duration that we can see is accelerating today. We can see the retrocausality, and for a long time, I was calling this thing or process the spiritual singularity, and I still do. But Terence McKenna calls it the concrescence of the transcendental object at the end of time. So I want to show a clip of him talking about this. Then I want to show you guys some of the messages I got from the retrocausality transmissions and put some exercises up to give you guys a chance to tune into the retrocausality language for yourself. And then after that, I want to go over the 3 retrocausality playlists I put together for February 22nd. Okay, so here is the Terence McKenna clip.
What I have discerned is that time is actually speeding up. That the universe is not what physics tells us it is. Physics tells us that the universe is a physical system, an entropic system that was born in immense energy and chaos and will run down with a bang, with a whimper, not a bang, run down into heat, entropy, and dissipation. The universe was not born in a fiery explosion from which it has been being blasted outward ever since. The universe is not being pushed like that from behind. The universe is being pulled from the future toward a goal that is as inevitable as a marble reaching the bottom of a bowl when you release it up near the rim. You know, if you do that, the marble will roll down the side of the bowl, down, 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 and eventually it will come to rest, which is the bottom of the bowl. That's precisely my model of human history. And now, bear in mind what the competition is peddling. The competition is peddling the idea that the universe sprang from nothing in a single moment for no reason. Now, whatever you think about that, notice that it's the limit case for credulity. Do you understand what I mean? If you can believe that, it's hard for me to imagine what you would balk at. If we were to sit down and say, let's see who can think of the most unlikely thing that could possibly happen, I submit to you, nobody could top the Big Bang. It is the improbability of improbabilities. It is the mother of all improbabilities right there. So I'm suggesting something different. I'm suggesting that the universe is pulled toward a complex attractor that exists ahead of us in time, and that our ever-accelerating speed through the phenomenal world of connectivity and novelty is based on the fact that we are now very, very close to the attractor. All Western religions have insisted that God would come tangential to history, but they all lose their nerve when you ask when, which is the only interesting question about that hypothesis. If it's not now, then what the hell difference does it make? It's just pissing in the wind as far as I can see. I think that the very real social crisis that is upon us, the crisis of population, of resource depletion, of atmospheric degradation, of epidemic disease, all these crises indicate that we are now down to the short epochs of this process of universal ingression into novelty, and that in fact it makes no sense whatsoever to speak of a human future. There is no human future. It's inconceivable, given where we are today, that to speak of the human world 1,000 years from now, or 500 years from now. It is literally, it either doesn't exist, or it's beyond our power of imagining. It isn't simply going to be non-polluting cars and smaller hi-fi speakers. That's an idiot's notion. Yeah, clearer TV pictures and stuff. It isn't like that at all. I mentioned this morning, how when you look at only one line of technological development, automobiles or computers, it looks like you can rationally anticipate what's going to happen. But when you realize that there are thousands of these lines of development, all transforming themselves, all moving towards some kind of omega point, then you realize that we're in the grip of what I call a concrescence. And I maintain that you don't have to believe me on this. You can see it from here. You just have to climb a high hill. There's one. But I think it's going to become more and more important for people to delinearize their view of time. Decondition yourself from the lie of history After all, if time were space, history would be a spider web. So bear that in mind. Concrescence. Concrescence is a word that I cribbed from the metaphysics of Alfred North Whitehead. And in fact, much of what I say, Whitehead provides the foundation for. He, like myself, had the idea that history grows toward what he called a nexus of completion. And these nexi of completion themselves grow together into what he called the concrescence. So a concrescence is a domain of extremely high novelty in comparison to whatever it's embedded in. So, for instance, you walking in the wilderness, you are a concrescence because you are more complex than the medium you're moving through. A raisin embedded in a cornmeal muffin is a concrescence. It is more complex than the muffin matrix in which it finds itself. So a concrescence is a local state of unusually high complexity. And a concrescence exerts a kind of attraction. Let's call it the temporal equivalent of gravity. So that all objects in the universe are drawn through time, not space. Gravity draws you through time. Gravity draws you through space. Time draws you toward the concrescence. This is why the universe is seen to be becoming more and more complex, faster and faster. The idea being, you see, that each epoch being shorter than the one that preceded it, this generates an asymptotic curve of approach. And it's become a cliche of our culture that time is speeding up. It actually is speeding up. It's not that it seems like it's speeding up or it looks like it's speeding up. It is speeding up. We and our entire world are being drawn into confrontation with something that at this level is lost below the event horizon of rational apprehension. That's a fancy way of saying you can't know jack shit about it at this point in time. There will come a moment when it will rise above the horizon of rational apprehension. But and I think that history is a set of nested resonances. This is what I mean when I say nothing is unannounced. Nothing can take you by surprise if you've really been paying attention, because everything is preceded by its harbingers and heralds. And we are living in an era now where there is a great deal of apocalyptic expectation, anticipation, and hysteria for several reasons. First of all, because Christianity just is hysterical in all times and places. Second of all, there's a built-in goose in the calendar. And that always exacerbates this Christian thing outrageously because of the promise made, Amen, amen, I say to you, this generation shall not pass away before I return to, clean your plow or whatever it is. And there is the physical evidence all around us that we are the witnesses to a planetary crisis that we cannot control or manage. I mean, it's very hard to believe that we could manage ourselves back into a steady state. Imagine an observer standing outside the event horizon of a black hole, watching an object approach the black hole. What you see, and this is similar to the argument or the example I gave a few minutes ago of the marble on the edge of the bowl. What you see is this, let's make it a spacecraft. This spacecraft that approaches the event horizon of the black hole, and then it's caught in the gravitational tidal forces of the black hole, and it begins to go faster and faster, around and around, faster and faster, and at a certain point it disappears into the singularity. This is from the point of view of an observer outside the system. Now we flash to the stalwart captain and crew on the bridge of this starship. What happens from their point of view, what happens is as they sink below the event horizon of the black hole and start the descent toward the singularity, time and space are dilated so dramatically that the singularity recedes to an infinite distance and you fall forever toward it. Well, what I would like to suggest, based on, here's what I'd like to suggest. This is one way of thinking about it, that our planet is on a collision course with something which we actually, at our present state of knowledge, don't have a word for. A black hole is simply a gravitationally massive object, so massive that no light can leave it. What I'm talking about is something like that, except that it isn't so much gravitationally massive as temporally massive. We are being sucked into the body of eternity, and I think it's going to happen very soon. Now, an obvious objection that someone would make to this, it's a probabilistic objection, is they would say, don't you find it rather unusual that your own very minute and finite life should occur so close to this moment of universal dramatic climax? Doesn't that clue you to the fact that you might be slightly deluded? To which I reply, not at all. Because I think of this event horizon as a series of like ghost horizons. And once you enter into history, what history is the outer shell of the gravitational field of the attractor of the concrescence. In other words, history is the disturbance in nature which precedes the concrescence. It precedes it by only 50,000 years. A microsecond. So a geological microsecond before all life is melted down in the presence of the singularity, there is a curious interface zone that is not the singularity and not the absence of the singularity. It's the singularity in the act of becoming. And it only lasts, as I say, a geological microsecond, 50,000 years. But if you happen to be born inside that microsecond, then you have a very curious perspective on the phenomenon indeed, because you observe it from within inside the shell of the historical vehicle. All I'm saying is, let's put the complexity in the more likely end of the cycle. Let's put it at the end, when after billions of years of evolution and all kinds of complexity and that sort of thing, everything comes together. So this kind of a cycle, if we were actually living in a universe like this, could completely unfold itself according to its natural laws and yet provide a miracle, the miracle of the concrescence. That's why I'm so keen on boundary dissolution. The more boundaries that have dissolved, the closer to concrescence we are. And when you finally reach it, there are no boundaries. You are eternity. You are all space and time. You are alive and dead, here and there, before and after. The singularity is a coincidentia oppositorum. It can simultaneously coexist in states which are contradictory. It is, Thomas Aquinas' vision of God. It's something which transcends rational apprehension. But it gives the universe meaning, because all process then can be seen to be a seeking and a moving and an effort to approximate, connect with, and attend to this transcendental object at the end of time. One way of thinking of it is like those bar balls that they hang in discos that send out thousands of reflections off everybody and everything in the room. Well, think of the transcendental object at the end of time as that bar ball, and then those reflected, twinkling, refractive lights are religions, scientific theories, gurus, works of art, poetry, great paintings. In other words, anything which has, we even use this phrase, anything which has a spark of divinity in it is in fact referent to the original source of the sparks of all divinity, which is the compressed experience of life and mind after billions of years of unfolding itself within the confines of three-dimensional space. You will absolutely guaranteed come into a sense of this thing, and it's real. And history is simply a perturbation on the surface of the waters of time as we approach the lip of this cascade into concrescence, novelty, and completion. But what I wanted to draw your attention to about this is it is not only an advance deeper and deeper into novelty, but it's an advance in which each successive stage occurs more quickly than the stage which preceded it. This is the whole story of the advancement of life. And in our species, it reaches its culmination, and it crosses over into a new domain where change no longer occurs in the atomic and biological machinery of existence. It begins to take place in this world which we call mental. Change which cannot be traced back to mutation of the arrangements of molecules inside long-chain polymers, but change taking place in syntactical structures that are linguistically based.
So he touched on a lot of things, like how we're being pulled like a magnet towards this transcendental object that exists at the end of time, and how really we don't even have a word yet to fully describe this divine thing or object. We just know that we're accelerating towards it, and we can see the acceleration and novelty. And he talked about how language-wise, well, he called it syntactical. I wrote it down. Where is it? He called it syntactical structures that are linguistically based. But language-wise, even that's starting to overflow with novelty as we accelerate towards this transcendental object at the end of time. And I think it's because there's a connection between this transcendental object at the end of time and what I've been calling the retrocausality language. I think the retrocausality language is the transcendental object at the end of time trying to communicate with us. And it talks to us in many ways. Like he said, it uses art and poetry, among other things. But y'all already know I tend to focus more so on the music side of things. So that's where I seem to be getting a lot of the messages. And it's just, the whole thing is just so crazy. I know I sound crazy when I say the transcendental object at the end of time is talking to me through the music. But, I mean, time isn't what we think it is. All of human history has been leading up to this. Those are McKenna's words, not mine. That's how something as pop culture-y as an Uncle Cracker song can be used as a means for this transcendental object at the end of time to talk to us. It's the weirdest thing. It's like the archetypes were always there, but I just didn't have ears to hear or eyes to see before. And I'm pretty sure Uncle Cracker and all these other artists aren't even consciously aware that they're being used to transmit these messages from the future. I would argue it's not even them who are conveying these things. Yes, their vocal cords are being used, but I promise you 99.9% of these artists aren't conscious of the deeper messages that are coming through them. It's like each of us has the potential to be used as a kind of transmitter that can tune into source either consciously or unconsciously. And I think McKenna was really smart to just call it an object instead of giving it a specific name. Because not giving the transcendental object at the end of the time a specific label, it kind of limits people's tendency to be judgmental about the label assigned to it. Like, what if he had labeled it something related to the second coming of Christ or rapture? That would have instantly offended a bunch of people and or turned off a whole group of people from even wanting to hear what he had to say. Now, for me, I prefer to call the transcendental object at the end of time source or God, but lots of people don't necessarily feel comfortable with the term God, and I get it, but just know when I say source or God or Christ consciousness, there's absolutely no religious dogma attached to it. Like I'm not using those words in a religious sense at all. It's just those are the only words I can come up with to encompass something that's so powerful and loving. Personally, I don't think God or source has any negative qualities. For me, the word God has always been like about the purest form of unconditional love. But anyways, that's just my disclaimer. I understand some people were brought up to fear God or think God is judgmental. I don't. And if God or source are terms that aren't, I don't know, if they're too heavy for you, then try to think of the transcendental object at the end of time as the spiritual singularity. Really, it doesn't care what you call it. It just wants to be noticed. And trust me, it'll try to get your attention any way it can. If you're noticing the synchronicity, all the different synchronicities and the triple, quadruple numbers over and over again, it's already starting to talk to you. Really, it's been trying to get our attention our whole life. And it doesn't just use synchronicities and numbers. Archetypes and music is one of the main ways it communicates. And, if you listen with an open mind, it will literally tell you what already happened in the future. It'll tell you about the nature of reality and the essence of what we really are. And it'd be one thing if it were just one crazy person saying this, but countless people are waking up to the messages. And I'm just going to tell you, if you've never heard it before, when you do finally hear it, it's probably going to bring you to tears. I'm not being melodramatic. I just want to read a comment someone named Inzi Pest left in the comments when he first heard the transmissions through the music. He said, quote, "This week I felt compelled to play Van Halen even though I've never really liked them much. The song Love Walks In, which I've never heard before, came on, and it almost brought me to tears. The message was so powerful. I shared that with my wife," or he said, "I shared with my wife, but she couldn't hear it," unquote. And I want to read another comment from Cheryl Z. She said, quote, "I've watched a couple of your retrocausality language videos and understood the point, but still didn't get it until this one. Not sure why, pretty sure it's on my end, but all the songs in this video spoke to me, though not exactly how you described it. I do think you are onto something. It reminds me of the 4 levels of Torah study. Not long after watching your video, as fate would have it, I listened to Rick Astley's song Never Gonna Give You Up. I haven't heard the song in years, and even though it was nice, and even then it was nice, but nothing particularly special. However, when I listened to it today, I started to cry. It was as if God were speaking directly to me. I know how crazy that sounds, but it doesn't make the feeling any less true, unquote. And guys, I've gotten other comments like this from people who started getting the communication. But at the end of this video, I'm going to put up some exercises so you guys can try to tune into the retrocausality language. But see, the thing is, not everyone's consciousness is going to be influenced by the spiritual singularity. And just because a loved one doesn't currently hear the retrocausality language, that doesn't necessarily mean they're never going to. But I am going to say some people's consciousness are already taken over by the retrocausality caused by the other singularity that's happening alongside the spiritual singularity. And the other singularity is the technological singularity. It's the complete opposite of the spiritual singularity. The only thing they have in common is that the spiritual singularity and the tech singularity are both accelerating at the same time. So there's actually two retrocausality time loops being caused by the Earth's mitosis. Or you could argue the two singularities are causing the Earth mitosis. But just like the spiritual singularity, the technological singularity already happened in the future. And it's not what most people think it is. It's basically it's a nanotech invasion of some people's DNA. That's how most people got taken over. It's through their DNA. They're still alive walking around. It's just their body is being manipulated by the nanotech. So I mean, if you're waiting to see highly advanced robots made of metal to signal the technological singularity is happening, you're gonna still be waiting, thinking it hasn't happened yet. The robots are made out of human flesh. They have all the same organs we do. They have the same kind of living tissue our body is made of, but they're not like us, and we're not like them. And those people, which actually make up the majority of the population, those people won't experience the Christ consciousness of the spiritual singularity. They've already chose which singularity they want it to merge with. And that's not being judgmental. That's just, I'm just explaining what will happen, is happening, and already happened. And I say it like that because linear time is an illusion, but it's hard to speak without having to use past tenses and pretenses. And you know, our language was actually designed that way on purpose. When most people lost their ability to communicate telepathically thousands of years ago, the minions that would be taken over by the technological singularity in their future reincarnations, they helped perpetuate the illusion of linear time even way back then. And one of the ways they did that was through spoken language. That's how far back the retrocausality of the tech singularity goes. Now, whether those individuals were consciously aware that they were being used to manipulate humanity, I don't know. I suspect most of them weren't conscious of it. They were probably conscious of the fact that they were evil, but I don't think they knew why. But I think the technological singularity tried to influence all of human history to try to make us blind to the fact that time isn't linear. And on top of other stuff too, like, you know, confusing us about the nature of reality and consciousness. But it doesn't matter that the tech singularity was able to reach so far back to influence human history, because the spiritual singularity also transcended linear time and influenced different aspects of human history too. The spiritual singularity actually had a hand in preventing Earth from becoming even worse than it already is. Like, you think it's bad now, this place would literally be like a living hell had it not been for the spiritual singularity ripples influencing humankind in countless ways. But see, it'll never violate your free will and force anyone to do anything, unlike the tech singularity that actively tries to control people. I think that's why the majority of the people have been taken over. It's not that the spiritual singularity is weaker than the technological singularity. It's just that the spiritual singularity isn't forceful when it comes to trying to influence people. Now, it'll do everything to try to get your attention, but ultimately it's up to each person to decide if they want to wake up to the spiritual singularity or not. That's how it's been influencing humanity throughout all of history. I mean, I don't know, don't you think it's odd that every single ancient tribe we know of uses music? Like, they took the time and effort to use their limited resources to make instruments out of whatever they could find. Why? Like, why did they take the time to do that instead of like hunting for food or doing other stuff we see as being more important? I think what our culture doesn't understand is those tribes weren't banging on drums and dancing around a fire during their ceremonies. It wasn't just like a simple thing like that. No, they were piercing the veil and connecting with the transcendental object at the end of time, aka the spiritual singularity. Now, someone looking in from the outside with a lower state of consciousness sees them doing this and assumes they're just dancing and playing primitive music. And that's what our anthropologists told us. Not necessarily because all of them were nefarious. I mean, some of them were nefarious, but a lot of them were just blind. Like, they were perceiving them and really the entire world from a lowered state of consciousness. They didn't know any better. But like, what inspired all those ancient tribes to use music or even discover what music was in the first place? How did human beings even come across music? Like, I don't know. It was, well, I do know it was the spiritual singularity, guys. It was the transcendental object at the end of time pulling them towards it. Long before the so-called civilized society we live in was even created, ancient people were consciously aware that the music could be used as a tool to connect with the ripples from the spiritual singularity. Now, of course, they didn't call it the spiritual singularity. They had probably other names for it, but somehow they discovered that different beats and harmonies create a bridge to this higher state of consciousness. And yes, there's many ways to connect to source. I mean, some people prefer to sit in silence and meditate, and that's a valid way to connect to higher consciousness too. There's definitely, a time and place for that. But that's not to say that music can't be used to help us get to the point of being able to enter that meditative state. I mean, I feel like we all already know how beneficial meditation is, but I don't know, I feel like more attention needs to be given to using music as a tool to pierce the veil. And even though the NPCs have tried to take over the music industry and corrupt the music, the ripples reverberating back to us from the future can't be erased, I'm telling you. But if we can't turn our antenna on to pick up on the signal, we won't hear it. So, like I said, I'm going to play some exercises to get y'all to practice tuning into the retrocausality language so you can see that, yes, the transcendental object at the end of time is indeed talking to us through the retrocausality language. Like, don't take my word for it. Experience it yourself. That's the only evidence you need to go by. But before I do, I just want to show you guys some of the transmissions I got from these 3 exercises I'm going to play. So multiple lines mention the words life and live. Now, when I tuned into the retrocausality language ripples, those words changed into archetypes for God's life force and Christ consciousness, which is what we end up merging with as we accelerate closer and closer to the transcendental object at the end of time. The word born in the lyrics changed into a reference about being reborn, aka emerging from a lower state of consciousness into a higher state of consciousness. And then the word run changed into a reference about running or functioning properly. So being in a higher state of consciousness is actually our natural state of consciousness. That's what I meant when I say run properly. The only reason we think this lower collective consciousness that we lived in most of our life is normal is because that's all we've ever known. That's all everyone around us has ever known for the most part. If you were born into an insane asylum and you'd never lived outside of it, then you'd have no idea that you were living in an insane asylum. I guess what I'm trying to say is Source made us to function or run properly. You could say we were born to run. And there's even a line in the second song that says, quote, 2 hearts born to run, unquote. Now, what the retrocausality language did is it changed the number 2 to 2, T-O, to convey that it's literally saying, hey, to you, to the hearts that are born to run. I'm saying this to you, to the hearts, if that makes sense. Also, the fact that TWO, that 2 version, the fact that that disappeared signifies that the separation that we thought was there is gone. Like, there's not 2 hearts here. There's not my heart and God's heart. There's just Source's heart. There's never been any separation. There was only the delusion of separation, but that's dissolving now as we move closer to the transcendental object at the end of time. That's why in countless songs you'll hear the retrocausality language keep mentioning the day. It always makes the word day stand out as an archetype for a time of spiritual awakening, because the morning or the day is when we wake up from our collective sleep. And that's when we go within ourselves to merge with the higher state of consciousness and ultimately merge with the spiritual singularity, or what McKenna calls the concrescence of the transcendental object at the end of time. And if you're looking at it with the religious lens, then you might call it rapture or something like that. And I sometimes refer to it as Christ consciousness, but again, I'm not using that term in a dogmatic way. It's just, I can't seem to come up with a better word to describe it. It's indescribable. It's like an ocean or sea of unconditional love and expansion when you go into this altered state of consciousness. And there's no end. There's no end to how much the waves can grow over the years. It's more than just an experience of unspeakable bliss. It literally creates like a physical sensation in the body, and it feels like a weight has been lifted and like there's less gravity or something. I know that sounds weird, but it's just beyond words. And the retrocausality language even added a double meaning to the word see in the lyrics. So see, S-E-E, morphed into a reference for spiritual sight, but at the same time it also became see, S-E-A, as in the God ocean. And you'd be surprised how many songs mention water references. Like, if you turn on the radio right now and listen for like an hour or so, I guarantee you're going to hear multiple lines that mention something about water, which are all references to the God ocean, this sea of love that's being emitted from a The word in multiple lines turned into instructions from the retrocausality language, basically telling us to go within our heart, inside our own God center, instead of focusing on the external material world to merge with the God ocean. And I think a big part of doing that is being open-minded enough to change our perspective and evolve beyond all the lies we were told about how everything here is physical. And there's even a line in one of the songs that says, quote, open mind for a different view, unquote. That was the transcendental object at the end of time, telling us to open up our mind or perspective on life to view things beyond this lower collective consciousness paradigm. A big part of being aware of the transcendental object at the end of time is overcoming our conditioning. I think Terence McKenna talked about overcoming boundaries. It's that same thinking. And this song also mentions the word new, N-E-W, which got changed to new, K-N-E-W, as in like an inner knowing. The word one changed into a metaphor that represents God or source. The word fire and burn stood out as a reference about an eternal passion for God's life force. And I'm almost done decoding, guys. The homophone night, N-I-G-H-T, changed into a metaphor for a time when most people are spiritually blind and asleep to a higher state of consciousness. But that was only in certain parts of the song. In other lines, night morphed into K-N-I-G-H-T to convey a reference for like a knight of God or warrior for God, or like the armor of God. See, that's how intelligent this retrocausality language is. It can apply different meanings to the same word depending on what message it's trying to get across. And the same thing happened for the word ring. Ring took on multiple meanings at the same time. So the word ring changed into a reference for the ear ringing or high-pitched tone we get in our ears sometimes, which I'm really starting to think is the sound of the veil being pierced. A ring also signifies a divine marriage, so like wedding bells ringing or a wedding ring comes to mind. And the word ring also stood out as a ringing telephone archetype, which is talking about a call or a means of communication between the higher spiritual realm and this realm. And I actually did a video recently about the connection between the ear ringing and higher states of consciousness. I'll put a link in the description if anyone's interested in that. But it's called Ear Ringing and Sleep Paralysis, Signal Coming Rapture. But the word till, which is actually a tool to harvest crops, the word till in these exercises I'm gonna play stood out as a reference to the holy harvest. So basically the transmissions were giving instructions for us to till the mind to prepare for the holy harvest of new earth. And I know I've kind of already talked about this in detail in other videos, so I'm not going to go too deep into this, but tilling the mind is training yourself to stay present and focused on being in the now moment with God. And, you know, it goes without saying that the spelling that's used for till is a huge Mandela effect. It was always apostrophe TIL. That was the shortened version of until. Until was never ever UNTILL. So why the spelling on mine has it as TILL is beyond me. But I will say the change actually seems to convey the transmission's message clearer in this case. But anyways, there's a line that says, quote, "I'm not the reason you go astray. We'll be all right if you don't ask me to stay," unquote. That was talking about how God isn't the reason humanity has gone astray. It's the ego mind and the constant thinking about the past and the future that makes us go astray. All that thinking drains the energy that should be being used to connect with Source. That's what keeps us tied to the lower collective consciousness, not being present in the here and now with Source. And I think that's why we're constantly being bombarded with distractions. It's to distract us from connecting to Source and experiencing a higher state of consciousness. But like the song said, we'll be all right if you don't ask me to stay. We'll be just fine if we don't ask ourselves or make ourselves stay in a low state of consciousness with the rest of the world that's gone astray. We have to separate ourselves from the lower collective consciousness hive. And at this point in the game, a lot of us can't really physically leave. Like, we can't go and live in an isolated cabin in the woods. It'd be nice if we could do that, but we can't. But what we can do is mentally and spiritually separate ourselves from the lower collective consciousness hive mind by choosing not to focus on all their distractions. And if that means, distancing yourself from certain people, certain jobs, do whatever you got to do. I just want to decode these last two things, and then I'll play these exercises. The line that mentions the word now changed into instructions telling us to be present in the here and now with Source instead of living in the past and future in our head. And all that goes back to all that constant thinking we do all day. And there's even a line that says, quote, "Who's crying now?" So what the retrocausality language will do sometimes is ask questions to encourage us to use our free will. So it's still influencing us, but in a way that doesn't negate our own free will. It's asking certain questions to get us to use our free will to find the right answers that point towards the spiritual singularity. So like, for example, it could ask something like, who will be the lonely one, to get us to realize that, wait a second, I'm not lonely at all. Source is right here with me. Now with this line, it uses wordplay to convey that the word crying isn't talking about someone being sad. Crying is talking about how our soul is crying out, telling us to focus on being in the now with Source. We have to be present and turn our thinking left brain off to experience Source's presence right here, right now. Okay, so I'm done decoding, guys. I'm going to go ahead and play these 3 exercises. Now, I did capitalize certain words to draw attention to the retrocausality language. And keep in mind, the retrocausality language doesn't always use proper grammar because it's too big to be limited by our, crazy human grammar rules. So it uses a lot of wordplay sometimes. What it does a lot of times, it also uses archetypes that you're familiar with to reflect a person's unique spiritual journey back to that person. So that's how 2 people can hear the same song and get different messages. And that's why the same song can transmit different messages at different times as we evolve over time. I think it's about how much our emotional frequency matches up to Source frequency. That's why I say we have to take a break from the distractions and only focus on God's unconditional love in real time as we're listening to the whole song. So take these next few minutes to slow down and be present with God and just focus on Source, and know that there's never a time when Source isn't trying to get our attention. Let the human artist disappear and let the music just be a conversation between you and Source. So just focus on God's unconditional love throughout the whole song and really ask yourself, God, if you could send me a message or a sign through this song about anything, including the transcendental object at the end of time, what would you want to tell me about?
Never cared for games they play. Caught on one-way streets, the taste of bittersweet. Love will survive somehow, some way. One love feeds the fire, one heart bears desire, one love who's crying out. Two hearts born to run, who'll be the lonely one? One love who's crying out. So many stormy nights, so many wrong or rights. Neither could change the headstrong ways. And if lovers rage, they turn another page. The fighting is worth the love they say. One love feeds the fire, one heart bears desire, one love who's crying out. Two hearts born to run, who'll be the lonely one? One love who's crying out. Only so many tears you can cry till the heartache is over, and now you can say your love will never die. One love feeds the fire, one heart burns desire, one love who's crying out. Two hearts born to run, who'll be the lonely one? One love who's crying out. You don't know how you met me, you don't know why you can't turn around and say goodbye. All you know is when I'm with you, I make you free and swim through your veins like a fish in the sea. I'm singing, follow me, everything is alright. I'll I'll be the one to tuck you in at night. And if you want to leave, I can guarantee you won't find nobody else like me. I'm not worried about the ring you wear, 'cause as long as no one knows, then nobody can care. You're feeling guilty, and I'm well aware, but you don't look ashamed, and baby, I'm not scared. I'm singing, follow me, everything is alright. I'll be the one to tuck you in at night. And if you want to leave, I can guarantee you won't find nobody else like me. Won't give you money, I can't give you the sky. You're better off if you don't ask why. I'm not the reason that you go astray, and we'll be alright if you don't ask me to stay. I'll be the one to tuck you in at night. And if you want to leave, I can guarantee you won't find nobody else like me. Don't know how you met me, you don't know why you can't turn around and say goodbye. All you know is when I'm with you, I make you free and swim through your veins like a fish in the sea. I'm singing, follow me, everything is alright. I'll be the one to tuck you in at night. And if you want to leave, I can guarantee you won't find nobody else like me. I'm singing, follow me, everything is alright. I'll be the one to tuck you in at night. And if you want to leave, I can guarantee you won't find nobody else like me. I'm singing, follow me, everything is alright. I'll be the one to tuck you in at night. And if you want to leave, I can guarantee you won't find nobody else like me.
So, I hope those songs were helpful to you guys. When we can tune into Source while we're listening to the music, there's no limit to the transmissions you can get. And I want you guys to check out the 3 playlists I made for us to listen to on February 22nd. There's a soft rock / pop one, an alternative rock playlist, and a 70s / oldies one. And I know it's not February 22nd yet, but now is the time to start practicing tuning into the retrocausality language. Even if you're watching this video after the 22nd, there's never a time when we shouldn't be using the music to connect with Source. So as you're listening to each song on the playlist, you're just going to do the same thing we did with these 3 songs we just heard. Just focus on God's love and ask Source to send you a sign through the music. And like I said, you don't have to only use these playlists on February 22nd. In fact, I would say tune into the retrocausality language as much as you can every day. But it's important that we listen to them February 22nd, because the 22nd is when like a bunch of other people are going to be focusing on piercing the veil by connecting to that unconditional love bliss. Like, I really think every time we break through, it creates bigger tears. And I think it'll be like the 100th monkey effect after a while. But yeah, you can find a link to all 3 playlists in the description below or on my channel homepage. I'm also going to pin them to the top of the comment section. So, yeah, that's what I'll be doing on the 22nd. And if you're not sure which playlist to start out with, I would say start with the 70s one. It's a really good one. Like I'm just saying. And, even though we won't be physically next to each other, we'll all still be connected through the music that day. All right. So I will talk to y'all later, and I'll see you guys in the music.